chamber leaders and business leaders who are joining us on the call. I know we received your letter in our office just a couple weeks ago, and I share your concerns and really want to make sure that we're hearing from you and understanding what lies ahead and what people are experiencing right now. Let me tell you that there is no more pressing priority than getting a deal over the finish line. And I continue to express frustration with everyone in Washington who hasn't got us to the point where we've got legislation on the floor that can pass both chambers and be signed into law. That's the only way we're going to get something done here, is to do it in a bipartisan way where we can get it to the president's desk for his signature. Now, we were able to pass some legislation through the House just a few weeks ago at the end of September, which contained some really great priorities for our business community, including a second round of the Paycheck Protection Program, streamlining forgiveness. There was a provision there that I supported to allow businesses getting PPP to also get the employee retention tax credit. Our provision dealing with 501c6 organizations and allowing them to access help was also in that bill. So I think the framework is there. We've seen some fits and starts the last few weeks as the Speaker and Secretary Mnuchin negotiate. There have been some rays of hope and then some times where the language hasn't matched up. But I mean, I think the scenario is this. We've got to make sure that we're not allowing the political situation that we face, or the fact that there's an election next week, to slow down the negotiations and the move toward legislation. I think, unfortunately, some might see this as an opportunity on all sides to sort of seek maximum political leverage. But we've got to make sure that the stories of our business community are front and center, and that's what's informing our push to get something done here. So I think that we will see continued interest and bipartisan support for the process moving forward. Look, we've got to treat this as the public health crisis that it is, first and foremost. And so that means that any legislation has to have contained within it additional money for testing, money for vaccine deployment, and the kind of public health steps that can allow us to really beat this virus and make sure that we're turning the corner. But as someone who has a family business and has been talking to hundreds of our local businesses the last few weeks and few months, I know that in particular this winter is of deep concern. People have innovated, they found new ways to serve customers and to keep their doors open, but that is a lot more complicated in the colder weather when people's behavior patterns change. People are going to want to be indoors more, but they might not necessarily feel safe being indoors at some of our retail locations and hospitality businesses. So we've got to make sure that they're well equipped to deal with what's coming ahead. And that's why this relief can't wait. In a time of such tremendous uncertainty, Congress and the president have to provide as much certainty and as clear a path forward as possible. So I do remain somewhat optimistic. I think all is not lost in terms of getting a solution. I think if we don't see something announced this week, unfortunately, we will see something probably announced in early November that will allow us to pass it and deal with the responsibility of how we provide the economic lifeline to those who are struggling and make sure that we're dealing with the public health threat that is out there. So I'd love to, just sort of open it up to the group and hear from you all, what your members are talking about, what you're going through in your own business, and how we might help. I'll just point out that Maeve from our office is on the line, and she has been working on small business issues. She took over for a woman named Savannah, who did some great work for us at the beginning of this pandemic and helped a lot of businesses out get connected to the resources that they need. So Maeve will put her information into the chat. And if you'd like some direct support or just to let us know, personally what's happening, please don't hesitate to reach out. So I guess with that, maybe Jen, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can just open it up for conversation, and would love to hear what's on your minds and, respond as, might be appropriate.
That's great. Thanks so much. I am interested to hear what folks have on their minds, what they'd like to share, what questions they have. But first, again, I just want to thank you, Congressman, for your time this morning. And, you know, to just reinforce, your staff have been so responsive and helpful throughout this pandemic. So you should be exceptionally proud of your team. They've really been great. And I think I speak for my colleagues at the other Seacoast Chambers as well when I say we appreciate your transparency and your availability. So thanks. So with that, what questions do folks have? Or what would you like the Congressman to know this morning?
Jen, can I ask a question?
Sure, Margaret.
So if this bill, the second round, I think it's the HEROES Act, you're calling it, doesn't pass before the election, do you have to start over after the election, or do you pick up and try to push it through?
So we won't have to start over. And I think that we have seen the negotiations progress to a point where we're actually getting down into the details of language. And I think that had really been the hang up to date between the Secretary of the Treasury and the Speaker, was that, you know, we weren't getting specific in terms of the language. Well, they have committee chairs that have been working on that. I think in terms of the testing piece, they're very close. And a number of the other issues, they're very close. So there won't have to be a restarting of that after November 3rd. Really, whatever's on the table right now is good through the end of the term, through the end of the year. And I think that provides us with a window to move forward as expeditiously as possible. And you know, as I said, I mean, this stuff can't wait. And I think we've got a lot of good provisions here, but I think my colleagues and I are feeling that if we can just get agreement on 3 or 4 things, you know, say PPP and the testing piece and some money for schools, that should be good enough for us to put that together and move that forward. So I think people are going to want to be pretty practical about this. In addition, you know, a lot has been said about funding for state and local government, as well as this business liability issue. And I think where this is going to go, and hopefully where it ends up, is that we do get money for our communities that are dealing with lost revenue and greater expenses, and that the trade for that is a safe harbor for businesses who are following the rules and following the public health guidelines to have a safe harbor from liability for the duration of the pandemic. I think that those are the 2 sticking points for both sides, but I think we can have a give and take on that and create a scenario where, you know, we're getting some good funding out and protecting businesses. I think that would be a real win-win.
And what do you mean by the safe harbor? Like they not have the forgiveness piece of it, or do you mean that they don't have to pay their?
Well, so this is on the liability issue.
Okay.
So there's concern from the business community about, well, you know, COVID is out there and we're not responsible for COVID being there, but are we going to somehow be held liable or be sued by folks who get sick? And so I think the answer to that should be, you create a safe harbor from liability for those businesses that aren't showing gross negligence or trying to do the right thing, so that they can keep their doors open and aren't forced to close. I hope that's where that conversation goes.
Okay, understood. We've had that discussion at the state level as well, and within our chamber. So yeah, that is of concern. Thank you for including that.
Thanks, Margaret. I know I saw other hands up before. Valerie.
Thanks, Jen. Congressman, continuing on the safe harbor discussion, I'm not sure of the ins and outs of what that bill possibly looks like. But here's a question for you. While none of our businesses are responsible for COVID, they do have an obligation to try to make their, right now, inside space as safe as possible. A couple of restaurants in Portsmouth have closed down out of an abundance of caution. And I think that part of that is because some of their staff have tested positive or have been near people who have tested positive. And so the question that I'm asking you, and might be too fine a detail, but perhaps you have an answer, is where do you draw the line? So if the staff is testing positive, does that make the restaurant liable? Or if we assume that a customer has come in and they've tested positive, I can see where that would be a little less gray. But if staff test positive, tell me where that is in the bill, please.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And this is another issue where we haven't seen the specific language, but the hope is that, you know, unless there's negligence on the part of a business and they're following what is recommended by state and local public health officials, that they're not necessarily liable for this. And I think we see this in what's happening with some of our restaurants where they're doing everything right. They've got plexiglass up, all the servers are wearing masks, but yet, you know, someone might have come into contact with someone in their lives outside of work. And then it's not that they're even spreading it at work. It's just the presence of them on the job with the virus causes the business to have to be closed, to clean, to test other employees, and then to reopen. And that's a long process. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be following that process. Certainly, we got to take every step possible to make sure it's not spreading further. But that's why the tools are really important to allow us to stay ahead of this in terms of the testing and contact tracing, which we need more of. And we need a rapid result. We can't be waiting, you know, have a business closed for 5 days waiting for all their employees to get their results back before they can open up. We got to turn things around a lot quicker than that. So I think that, you know, we really want to create a cooperative relationship between public health and our business sector. I think that's been going on here. And I think that business owners want to do the right thing because they want to make sure people walking through the door have the confidence that this is a safe environment where, you know, I can shop or I can eat and I'm not going to have a problem. And so I think people have been going the extra mile to make sure that that is the case. So I think where the language will have to land is that it's all about if there's negligence or not. I haven't seen any negligence in New Hampshire, frankly. I think people are all abiding by the guidelines and doing the right thing. But there could be a case where that happens. And, you know, I think that should be, I don't think the liability protection should stretch to cases like that where there is negligence.
Thank you. Jen, if I may, with a follow-up. Congressman, you just talked about the fact that people are putting up plexiglass, et cetera. So now that we're seeing a spike, I've had some restaurants call me and say, we don't know if the state or even our city is going to close us down and go back, you know, a phase or two, so that if, for instance, there wouldn't be any more indoor dining. And so our restaurants who already don't have any money are being asked to put up plexiglass, for which they don't have the funds to do. But if it's going to close down again, they're not going to do. So all of that is just to reinforce your original statements that we have to get the funding for our businesses. We absolutely have to get it, because if we don't, many that I've spoken with will simply close because they just don't know. It's like the squirrel in the road. Should we do it? Should we not do it? Should we do it? Should we not do it? And so they're not going to do it. They just don't have the funds to be able to do it. So no response required. I'm just certainly supporting your view that we have to get this done in whatever way that we can get it done. We've got to get it done because our businesses will close. So thank you. I know you've been working really hard on that, and I appreciate that. So thank you. I'm just reinforcing your position. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think what you were alluding to there is we just can't afford a second shutdown. That is not really an option for us, only in extraordinary circumstances. And we've got to make sure we head that off. And that's the personal responsibility that we all have to try to do the right thing and keep New Hampshire, you know, relatively low where we've been. We've been rather lucky, especially as we compare ourselves to the rest of the nation. And I think that's due in large part to sacrifices people have made, the fact that there was a pretty severe shutdown in the early stages of the pandemic, and people have trusted the public health officials and scientists to, you know, take the steps that are appropriate. That's got to continue. That takes vigilance, and we just can't afford to have that happen. Now, there are bills that deal specifically with sectors that continue to be adversely impacted, and, you know, might feel a significant amount of pain through the winter. There's a bill called the Restaurants Act that is specifically a disaster fund for restaurants that was actually included in the bill that we passed through the House a few weeks ago. And the hope is that remains on the table. So this is not even loans. This is direct grant money to restaurants who are struggling and losing revenue. There's also one for our entertainment venues called the Save Our Stages Act, which is basically another fund that would provide 6 months support to allow them to get through these next few months where they really can't be doing concerts and having performances, or if they do, they're selling a lot fewer tickets than they ordinarily would. So those are at least a couple that target help to industries that are suffering because of the reality of COVID and some of the government directives. And so I think that, you know, if these directives continue to be in place, we've got to make sure that we're trying to make these businesses whole as best we can.
So is the emphasis on securing funds to, you know, help the businesses stay open, or is there some and I guess I'm just looking for clarity, some assumption that some of these businesses will have to close, either, you know, by, you know, I know you said we want closures, but the lines are moving in the wrong direction, and really there's kind of, I think it's reasonable maybe to expect a demand problem for restaurants in the winter, right? Where they may be they may be implementing safety protocols, but, you know, people are unmasked in restaurants. There's elevated risks therein, right? There's ventilation concerns for long periods of time in the restaurant, increasing the probability of somebody working there testing positive. And additionally, like, people just may not feel safe going in there when they see the case numbers going up. So is there, like, at least some acknowledgement that those restaurants really may not be able to operate? And I guess I might put gyms in the same category there. Like, for people like me, it doesn't really make a difference. You know, I don't need that face-to-face communication, and what I do doesn't require that I'm in immediate proximity of a lot of people. But like restaurants, it's a really different animal, and they have like sort of shrunken occupancy.
Yes, and I think that's what this Build a Restaurant Act contemplates, is that we know restaurants are going to be down significantly over the winter. They already are, and that it looks to, you know, keep employees on the payroll while making up for the revenue that's being lost here over these tough months ahead. And I just think that's something sensible that we can all get behind. And you know, there's already so much pressure on a lot of these businesses that have borrowed significantly over the last few months. And I don't think additional loans make a lot of sense, even if you can spread that out over a long period of time at low interest rates. I think it's got to be direct support. And, you know, what the Federal Reserve Chair has told us is that we should be going big. It's expensive, but this allows our economy to come back much stronger. And I think we got to conceive of this as a short-term investment to help make our economy whole and make sure that we can get back up on our feet quicker. So that's I think how many people are looking at this situation, and it's a stark reality for a lot of our restaurant businesses that you know, just, you know, if they could open their doors fully and things were safe, people would be back in droves, right? And so this is almost unlike other recessions that we've been through, where you know, you can put money in people's pockets, they'll go out and spend it. Well, if you're a retailer, you're a restaurant, you're a hotel, you're a music venue, that's not necessarily the case. So they're sort of cut out of any efforts to stimulate economic activity because people just can't, you know, go and shop or spend like they would at some of these businesses. So that's where some of these sort of disaster funds can come in to help make up the difference.
All right, terrific. And that helps. Yeah, because I just to clarify, like, what was driving my question, I wasn't sure if we were sort of assuming happy path, where if the businesses can stay open, that the demand will be there. And okay, that answered my question, that you're assuming that you have assumptions built in that may not be the case. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I have another one. What about hospitals? Many of our chambers have large hospitals in our communities, and they're really struggling. What is being put in place for those facilities who selfishly they do support the chambers, but they our mainstays of our communities, ensuring our good health. What's in the future for those institutions?
They are certainly struggling, and we had some news last week about Lakes Region General Healthcare filing for bankruptcy. Looks like they're going to have a partnership with Concord Hospital moving forward, which might help keep most of those services in place. But there's tremendous pressure on our hospitals right now. And when you look region by region, they're some of our largest employers in New Hampshire. And, for months at the beginning of the pandemic, they were forced to cancel elective surgeries and revenue generating procedures that really are the bread and butter of these facilities. And so there were several $100 million that came through the CARES Act to New Hampshire hospitals to help stabilize things during those months. But they are still losing money today because they're having to take extra steps, and they're still not back to where they would be in terms of a normal rhythm of business. And if we see numbers climb again, we're going to be back to where we started from at the beginning of this. So it is contemplated that we'll see some additional direct support in upcoming legislation for our hospitals. We're also really pushing the state and local aid. One of the things that New Hampshire was able to do with its CARES Act money, over $1 billion, was to carve it up and create some funds for nonprofits, for frontline workers, for our hospitals. And I tend to think that New Hampshire can figure out how to spend those dollars a lot better than folks in Washington can with sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think, that's part of the need for this state aid, is that not only can we deal with the state losing revenue to make sure things aren't cut, but to, recalibrate some of the programs that exist to make sure we're taking care of things like hospitals, because it's not even across our state. Some have seen a much higher load of COVID patients, so they've been a little bit more impacted because they haven't been able to bring back other services. Others haven't seen the impact in that direction, but they're still dealing with workforce challenges and PPE and all that. So I think our state can really help direct those funds in the right manner, and that's why we need that as part of the next package too. But there probably will be an additional hospital fund through the Federal Department of Health and Human Services in the next bill.
Thanks. We have just a few more minutes. So before I turn it back over to you, Congressman Pappas, for some closing remarks, I guess the question I have is, given where we've been, where we are, the very murky crystal ball about where we're heading, what advice do you have for business leaders in terms of, if they had to prioritize their focus, where should they be doing so right now, given where we're at and where we are potentially going? Yeah.
Well, I'll have to say that, the business advocacy groups in our state, our chambers, our lending community have just been fabulous at deciphering the federal programs, connecting folks with support, finding ways to make sure people have what they need through the last many months. And so I think they're going to continue to be a really important resource moving forward, especially if we can enact another bill soon. They're going to be the ones that will, provide the support and understanding of what's out there to make sure folks are connected with the help that you all need. I think beyond that, we all in our own way have to continue to be responsible and modify and innovate. I mean, the things that have gone on these last few months in terms of how people have changed their business models, have ripped up and rewritten their business plan, have been so, inspiring. And, I think longer term, this is going to take our business community to a new place, and hopefully a more prosperous place. As people have put more of their business online and have just been creative about how they can serve customers in new ways. So, that will have to continue. But look, I just think these winter months are going to be so different from what we went through this summer. If the virus numbers are up and we all are indoors and not outside as much, that's going to change how people are going to be able to respond. And so, all the more reason why we need to make sure our local chambers are well equipped for this, our small business development centers, that SBA is giving clear guidance, and that our lending community really has some clear rules of the road in terms of what programs are available, and what forgiveness provisions are out there, say for the Paycheck Protection Program. We're working to streamline that. So I think we'll know a lot more after another couple weeks, but we do want to make sure that all these local business advocacy entities have what they need to continue to provide the support that they do. They're just such a crucial piece of this puzzle.
Thanks so much. I do see that Maeve put her contact information in the chat. So if you have any other questions or concerns now or in the future, I know that Maeve and the staff over at the Congressman's office have been so responsive and helpful. So make sure you write that email down, because that's a really important email. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this morning for this conversation. Again, Congressman Pappas, thank you so much for the time. We know that your schedule is an overscheduled one, and so we're glad you were able to carve out some time for this conversation this morning.